Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone get in and get settled.
I don't give a shit.
Okay, Chaslin, what do you say?
All right, I think we've got everyone. Looks like everyone's getting settled. Okay. All right, so hi everyone. I'm Chaslin and I'm from the Upper Skagit Library and I'm the Library Programs Associate. So my job is to basically put together cool stuff like this or play Dungeons and Dragons with teens or set up photography club, all kinds of cool stuff. So today we're doing a presentation and this is part of Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau's program. So Humanities Washington is a nonprofit organization dedicated to sparking conversation and critical thinking, and it provides many other cultural programs to hundreds of thousands of people throughout Washington each year. So thanks to support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Washington Secretary of State, the Thomas S. Foley Institute for Public Policy and Public Service at the Washington State University, and many private donors, Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau presenters visit all corners of the state when we're not in a pandemic. Otherwise, we'll do everything virtually. So you can visit Humanities Washington's website, www.humanities.org, to find other events just like the one we have today. A quick note on civil discourse. The Speakers Bureau program is designed to generate an open and honest conversation on many topics, some of which may be controversial. We encourage differing perspectives and viewpoints, but we also ask that you treat this topic, the speaker, and each other with respect. So today, our speaker is Miss Christine Hemp. Christine is an author, poet, essayist, and art critic. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Humanities from Willamette University and a Master's of Arts in English from Middlebury College. She's the recipient of a Washington State Artist Trust Fellowship for Literature and teaches poetry and nonfiction at the Hugo House in Seattle. One of her poems has traveled over 1.5 billion, with a B, miles on a NASA mission to monitor the birth of stars. Her newly released memoir, Wild Ride Home, Love, Loss, and a Little White Horse, takes place on the Olympic Peninsula. So for today's format, we're going to have a presentation from Christine on language, and then at the end, we'll have probably a brief question and answer session. So if you can hold all of your questions to the end, that would be fabulous. And without further ado, Miss Christine Hemp.
Excellent. Thank you, Chaslin.
You're very
Can you all hear me? You all hear me and see me okay? Yes? Raise your hand if you can see me and hear me. Okay, good. Excellent. Chaslin's been a great host so far, getting this all lined up. And if it were in the real world, I would have been going up in the Skagit Valley at to her library at the time of the geese, trumpeter swans, and the geese in their migration. And I was so looking forward to that. But I will still go up there, Chaslin. And here we are in the virtual world. I'm really happy to see all of you. I'm so glad you came. It's actually turned out to be kind of an intimate thing, this video virtual world. I've been giving readings with my book and doing this program too, and it's so much fun. And I would still like you to remember that even if you're from Boston or in Seattle or somewhere else right now, this was meant to come to this particular library in this particular place, and that really pleases me. I think one of the things that's different about virtual is that geography just becomes, you know, really sort of liquid, but there is a place that this happens, and it's because Chaslin that we're doing it. So thank you, Chaslin, so much. So
thank you so much for doing this with us.
You know, when I first started conjuring this talk, I was bemoaning the current state of public discourse. And when I first started writing this talk to try out for Humanities Washington, I love that. That's like a doorbell. Hello, you know, like there's a you know, a butler waiting at the door for the people to come in. But when I first started writing this and thinking about giving it to Humanities Washington, you know, I was really, you know, concerned, and this was 2 years ago, about the lack of decorum, the lack of respect for language, which translates, of course, into the lack of respect for people and the animate world we live in, and how rhetoric has taken on this mantle of, you know, who can shout the loudest. And of course, the trend of all this has been blamed on politics, blamed on this breathtaking rise of social media and the internet in general. And when I proposed this talk, I wanted to answer the question, you know, why did this happen? But now, here we are in the middle of a global pandemic, economic crisis, and even more political mayhem. So it seems as if the questions about language are even more complex and more urgent, at least to me. But I've quickly learned, instead of going, oh dear, I've learned to take the long view and to roll the movie camera way back and enlarge the frame. And for how can we make sense of this huge paradigm shift we're in, it seems to me, how do we do that when we're right in the middle of it, you know? And it just feels like riding an earthquake, you know, the ground is trembling and rolling, but all you can do is hang on and see where it will move to. And I'm always reminded that science and history tell us that chaos and disorder always precede creation. And after all, language is like a living species, is morphing and moving and accommodating our experience all the time, especially in times of social upheaval like we're in right now. Yes, language can be a terrible divider, and we'll talk about that later, but it also has the miraculous capacity to connect us, no matter what political, religious views we hold. It connects us in a way, it connects us in a way that we're saying, oh my goodness, it's still there. I mean, and it comes out in literature, and at its best, it lifts us out of our loneliness and gives us greater voice to our humanity and our sense of belonging. And there we go back to Chaslin, the sense of place, the Skagit Valley. You know, when we actually talk about place in our language and get very specific about it, it becomes actually more universal. And I would argue also that such language is found not only in fiction and poetry, it appears in assembly instructions. I always just quote this because it's so funny. I have a potter friend, and when she opened up the kiln, her new kiln, there were little directions, or the little slip of paper that came out and said, honestly now, have you read the directions? And you know, there's a perfect little like haiku of connecting. And you hear great language in the doctor's office, YouTube videos, and many times escaping the lips of small children. language that wakes us up and makes us see the world in a new way, and perhaps a fresh truth you didn't know before. So I have changed since I first conceived this talk, and the talk has changed as well. And so instead of saying, why is this happening? I've begun to ask, how is our language changing? How does it stir us into seeing more clearly, thinking more carefully, feeling more deeply, in scary times as well as peaceful ones? And so today I speak not as a scholar, a linguist, or a historian, but my inquiry really, I would say, is that of a curious poet who makes, and writer who makes her living with words, one who reveres the beauty of the language and its capacity to join us, not only to each other, but to the land and the creatures around us and the places we inhabit. So consider this little talk, bing bong. Are you hearing the bing bong? That's so funny. It's like, oh, that was a good phrase, bing bong. So, oh, thank you. So consider this little talk a buffet of questions rather than this big 5-course meal of answers. Today's program, it includes not just mine, but my words, but yours. So this is how it's going to go. I'll speak for roughly 20 minutes or so. And after that, I will invite you to open discussion and questions. Anybody's game. This is no, it's not going to be awkward or anything, but I hope that the talk will spur something in you that we can all have a conversation. And it's happened in the past in these talks, and it's so dang fun. And it's really fun on Zoom. It totally is. So finally, it's my wish that you will turn away from your screen at the end of this and go off to dinner or look at the television about the convention or not do that, that when you do turn away, that perhaps you'll have a new idea or two about how your own language can make a difference. Not just language with a capital A, but your own language and how you live in the world right now. So, okay, Homer, isn't he beautiful there with all his hashtags all over his face? And this is, I had to show you this. This is Rembrandt's portrait of himself with, it's it's the great Greek scholar. Now I've forgotten him, but there's the bust of Homer, but it's a painting by Rembrandt. So we don't even know if Homer was a real person, okay? But the Greek myth tells us he was a blind poet, and it may have been a cadre of poets. They were called makers in ancient Greek, who composed the stories and classic tales, and the ones we know as the Iliad and the Odyssey. And even if we haven't read them all, I imagine some of us had read it in high school or taught it as a high school teacher. But Western culture, we know the story of Odysseus going off and Trojan Wars and death and destruction, and coming back home to Ithaca to find his wife, after she, kept off all of her suitors. Well, Western culture points to the work of this amazing, amazing story. These two epic poems, because they're the first tangible example of what we now know as writing. Writing. Sure, the Sumerians scratched their cuneiform tablets around 4000 BCE. And the Egyptians got busy with their hieroglyphics soon after that. But those were mostly, oddly enough, I didn't know this until I researched it, but those beautiful, beautiful ledgers were business ledgers and informational symbols. Think QuickBooks, not King Lear. And even though humans have walked and talked on this planet for, 6 million years, what we know now as writing is a relatively recent invention. Homer's epic poems were sung and danced and told for thousands of years before they were actually written down in 800 BCE, less than 3,000 years ago. The idea of recording our stories on papyrus, clay tablets, newsprint, USB drives, Microsoft Word, Google Docs. It's not that old. It's a relatively new art form, and that continues to blow me away. And interestingly enough, last year, the Smithsonian had a story about a fragment of the Odyssey written on a clay tablet. It was unearthed on the Peloponnese Peninsula, dated 3rd century AD, and this turns out to be the oldest known artifact of Homer's story. Now, is that cool or what? That just blows my mind. But so what is it about Homer's story that still captures our imagination? And it's my guess that this dramatic narrative of the bloody Trojan Wars, romantic love, and a heroic trip home by the hero Odysseus is the quintessential mythic journey. We all know about Joseph Campbell's stories of how he found the archetypes of these mythic journeys. And, both ancient and modern, they still have heroic characters, romantic characters, often a big, long journey and coming home to being transformed and changed. I mean, you think of the books you like now. They're books that actually take you on a journey, and they show you how the character thrives and is challenged and goes through the dark wood and then comes home a transfigured and transformed person in some way, home being both figurative and literal. The poet Stanley Kunitz said something really interesting about this, that he talks about, these stories, just like the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they go back so far even beyond memory. And he says the body, this is so cool, the body in our genetic code holds the long odyssey of the race. And he's suggesting that our deepest, most profound stories are actually in our DNA. And that's whether we're crossing the Aegean, whether we're in the Skagit Valley with the snow geese and the trumpeter swans, or whether we're crossing the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And what's kind of cool is that fresh words and ways of telling these stories emerge all the time. They rouse us to see new worlds. Think of Britain before the Norman conquest in 1066, where this is AD, where Anglo-Saxon, yes, a language different, but from which our English is drawn, it included this cool metaphorical device called a kenning. Say it to yourself, kenning, kenning. And what it was two words stuck together to create a picture. And if you read Beowulf in high school, you would have encountered them. Recently, just not long ago, there's this scholar, Josephine Livingstone. She wrote a little piece in the New York Times that described kennings as metaphors that had a way of talking around the thing you want to represent. Hron, for example, in Old Anglo-Saxon, meant whale. Rad meant road or path. So whale and path, okay, put them together, she said, and you get whale road, Hron-Rad, which means not just a leviathan, not just a freeway, but the sea. The ocean is not an empty space, the Hron-Rad tells us. It belongs to the whale. And human beings crisscross it on all our adventures, she writes. But when we do, we are trespassing on a very large mystery. Hron-Rad. And ever since I read that, this is my horse Buddy here, looking out over the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And every time I look out, when we have our adventures along the sea, I can't help but think, what's underneath there? There we have a Hron-Rad. That C is a Hron-Rad. It incorporates so much mystery and so much life. So we don't have to be poets to appreciate the way language sticks in our imagination like Velcro, and how it accommodates all our new stories and the stories of the world, not just our own. And fresh new words and phrases appear all the time. Oh, by the way, the newest words, I looked them up, the newest additions to the Merriam-Webster dictionary are self-isolate, haptics, dark web, and Instagram as a verb. That's pretty amazing. And that's just recent. I like to look up the Merriam, I like to look it up from time to time. And when I first composed this talk, nearly 2 years ago, the words were very different. They weren't these same ones that were the newest. Of course, Shakespeare alone contributed 1,700 words to our English language, by the way, including bleach. Now, isn't that a coincidence? Bloodstain, luggage, and the word zany. That's my personal favorite of Shakespeare's. I always give him a nod if I use the word zany. But there's a reason so many words were added to the English language in the 16th century, and just 100 years before Shakespeare penned his plays. Our friend, Mr. Gutenberg, who, as we all know, printed the first Bibles, invented the printing press and opened the door to the miracle of the mass-produced printed word. Before the printing press, we all know that books were made and written by hand, mostly by monastics, and vetted by the aristocracy and the clergy. These books were primarily sacred texts, as this 8th century illuminated manuscript, the Book of Kells, which is, I think, in the Dublin Library Museum, of the 4 Gospels. And the book, of course, was an object of devotion as well as a source of spiritual information, because you look at those beautiful, beautiful, illustrations. Those monks were up there drawing and painting away, and only the very rich could afford them, of course. So imagine the uproar when people like Gutenberg began to slap ink on plates and reproduce all kinds of texts at what must have seemed lightning speed, I suppose. All of Europe wanted to get in about what might be called not a Hron-Rad, but an info-rad. One of them was the English merchant and writer William Caxton, who built the first British printing press in 1476. And he published the first edition of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And bingo, bango, bongo, the printing press changed the face of Europe. Oh, and by the way, Caxton himself contributed more than 1,000 words to our language, including concussion, servitude, and voyager. Now that's pretty interesting. Of course, I included the picture of NASA's Voyager, but if you think back to those centuries, that's when Europeans were traveling the world in exploration. So, what does all of this have to do with what is going on now? I do like those old illuminated manuscripts, I have to say. I like to linger on those. But we should know that one of the first books Caxton published was called The Dictes and Saying of the Philosophers, meaning the Greek philosophers. And he took it from a French translation of an anthology of ancient Greeks, complete with comments on the philosophers' lives, a kind of Bartlett's familiar quotations with personal details. Caxton was so pleased by the details, things like, apparently Socrates wagged his little pinky when he spoke in public. And then there was the previously unknown side to Pythagoras, who of course was, it said that he was absolutely fanatic about serving God, except there seems to be something lost in translation, because even in those times, it was well documented that Pythagoras was actually pagan, and he believed in reincarnation and numerology. And according to the social media critic for the New Yorker magazine, Pythagoras, yes, was a real person. Some of the philosophers in the dictates, he said, probably never even existed at all. Some of those characters in his book that he said were the Greek philosophers. And he didn't even introduce these errors. Apparently, Caxton didn't have a very good fact checker. So the common historical take on the advent of the printing press is that, we always say, finally, information became available to everyone. It set off a huge upheaval in Western culture. A few items like the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, the steam engine, journalism, modern literature, of course, modern medicine, and, of course, modern democracy. According to the critic Marantz, that is the story, but not the whole story. Catholic priests and crown princes were no longer the gatekeepers of information. Only aristocracy could have afforded those lavish hand-painted books, like the Book of Kells, and so now anybody and his sister who could read were empowered by the written word, from political and religious reformers to poets and storytellers. The new information age. But isn't there always the shadow side to every bright coin? This newfound freedom of speech also attracted all kinds of yahoos, profiteers, hucksters, terrorists, and yes, bigots. In fact, as publications of all kind became available, a new wave of racism swept through Europe and Britain, after tracts spread with fear-mongering and unfounded facts about various races, including, apparently, Caxton's own broadside against the Muslims. Hate groups, deja vu all over again. Since the old gatekeepers of information, the priests and princes, were no longer in charge of words and language and information, ding dong. Well, the inventors and innovators reluctantly found themselves in the role. Sound familiar? Caxton, ambivalent about his position from the start as a publisher, argued that he was only a publisher, that his press should be considered only a platform. He told his critics he was merely serving his customers. So I don't know if looking at history gives us comfort, but it does give us perspective on our times and the seismic shift we're riding right now, even today. We are shocked by our own cases of conspiracy theories and fake news. Trusting for years in our dependable news sources, we are now grabbing at snippets flung at us from more sources than we could possibly read in one day. Where are the gatekeepers, we ask? Why isn't somebody stopping this? The hate talk, the conjuring of fear, the falsehoods. Again, that's another question we can't answer right now. But there are those who take a different tack across the whale road. They see a lack and fill it with something we might not have expected, and not always in the places we expect. In 2015, the Oxford Children's Dictionary dropped roughly 50 words related to nature. Words like fern, willow, and starling, bramble, dandelion, and newt, otter, and oyster. These words were replaced with words and terms like broadband and cut and paste chat room, blog, and database. In response to this, a panoply of authors and citizens and librarians rose up in protest. Their alarm was centered around the idea that if we take away those words, we are robbing our children of their sense of belonging to the natural world. And if I might add, a sense of place. What if all the children of the Skagit Valley couldn't open their dictionary to the word trumpet or swan? Enter nature writer Robert McFarlane and children's book author and illustrator Jackie Morris. They teamed up not just to counter Oxford's deletions of words, but enact what they call a rerouting in the natural world. And they don't call them poems, the writing that's in this book. They call them spells. To catch the wonder, they say in the book's introduction. For both children and adults, not only the beauty and wonder, but the eeriness too of the natural world. The book is both eulogy to disappearing species and words, but it is also an act of creation by naming. I'm going to pull this up on my other screen so I can read it to you. This is, let me just get to that in a second. I'm going to get to that. Names for things and people too, we realize that we're all connected to other names, other things. As naturalist John Muir said, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it's hitched to everything else in the universe. Words are hitched to other words. Can't we remember the Hron-Rad, the whale road? And those are hitched to the entire lexicon of being. What we learn from a book like this is that language has the capacity to help us pay attention, to listen, to see, to hear. In fact, the instructions in Lost Words are for us to read aloud, like spells. And why don't you turn to that now? And I'm just going to read it to you because I like it so much. Dandelion. Dazzle me, little son of the grass, and spin me, tiny time machine. Tick-tock, sun clock, thistle and dock, now no longer known as dent de lion, lion's tooth, or wind blow. Tick-tock, sun clock, nettle and dock, evening glow, milk witch, or parachute, so. Let new names take out and root, thrive and grow. Tick-tock, sun clock, rattle and dock. I would make you some, such as bane of lawn perfectionists, or fallen star, or football pitch, or scatterseed, but never would I call you only, merely, simply, we. Tick-tock, sun clock, clover and dock. I think it's a wonderful little poem. It really feels like a spell, doesn't it? Feels like a spell. And if we think of how compact little words can be, this tiny little poem by the poet George Hutchinson does exactly what that spell in the Lost Words book does. Artichoke, she calls it, he calls it. Oh, heart, weighed down by so many wings. And immediately we picture that artichoke alive, just like the dandelion, the tooth of the lion. It gives us a picture. And by the way, that book, Chaslin, if that isn't in your library, it's one that should be. It's giant. It's lovely. And the paintings are just out of this world. The kids love them. So there are tiny ways we can see where language moves us. I mean, even the tiniest things, a sign enters us other than don't park. This sign has always appealed to me. I remember I first saw it once in Boston when I lived there in my 20s, and I just thought it was the greatest sign ever. And really, if we think about it, some critics, yes, there's Buddy again. Some critics, some people criticize Twitter because of its brevity, in its in-your-face, sometimes lurid immediacy. But the difference between a tweet that divides and a tweet that connects us is not just about the words themselves, but how they are used. After all, you know, words are drawn from the same dictionary. And when we pay attention, language has the power to connect us rather than divide us. As a friend said to me recently, when someone asked her, what makes language and literature art? And she said, art rises above the merely personal or self-referential. It connects her more deeply to humanity. So I chose not to publish hate tweets on my talk because I felt that it was actually not rising above our self-referential selves. It connects us more deeply to humanity. Even putting Buddy with the head in parking only pleases me, to put an image with a word. There are ways to make language and images make us look at things new. And so Twitter can also have the possibility really of connecting. I've been looking at a few poets on Twitter and that have the most spare language ever. And here's a couple of them. Here, if I can you see it okay? The first is by a poet named D'. So all you have to do is hashtag D' or at D', and she's pretty interesting. And she says, I will wait for you in a lost language. I will wait for you in a lost language. Now, if that isn't a love poem, I don't know what is. And then here's another one. She writes and she drowns. Very, very, very small snippets of language, but that lift us to a new place in our imagination. And in the last few days, with the uproar over ballots and mail and voting machines, I've wondered about the rage that occupies so many on social media. And not unlike the printing press, Twitter and other ventures have leveled out the playing field of language. Now anyone who can type and say whatever they want to whomever they want. The physical moving to the virtual has given people so much power, where before they were muted with only 280 characters or none at all before the internet. And so there's a lot that can happen. This is not to say good or bad, but again, here we are asking, how did this happen rather than why? And look at the amazing poems that can happen. And today I typed mailbox on Twitter, and this is the first thing that showed up. Not Buddy and the mailbox, but the writing. I just put the writing on a picture I have when Buddy and I were delivering some mail. And it was a little piece of writing by John Updike, who is dead now, but it was on the Best Poetry site. And quoted by another poet, but this is what he said, John Updike. I never see a blue mailbox without a spark of warmth and wonder and gratitude that this intricate and extensive service is maintained for my benefit. I thought that was a kind of cool thing to go with the mailbox, that mailbox will maybe they will remain in their physical way, and to actually market today on Twitter was an act of affirmation.
Hey, Christine, can I interrupt you really quickly? It looks like we're having some trouble seeing your screen.
Oh dear. Okay. Oh dear. Have I been going on and on?
It looks normal for me, but a couple of our participants are saying that
Okay.
they can't see.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop share and then I'm going to pull it up again, okay?
Okay,
So
thank
don't
you.
panic. All right, there's me. Okay, share screen. How about that now? Are we okay?
No, I actually see just double the gallery now.
You just see the gallery. Okay,
Right.
that's all right. We're doing okay on time. I'm almost done, so we will stop share.
Yeah. And for anyone who's struggling to see through the different views, if you move your cursor over the video, it will actually give you a couple of view options. So it will alter who you see speaking at any given time or where the shared screen is, depending on your device as well.
Okay, I'll stop again and pull it up. Let's see. What I might do is just, okay.
What, Lolly?
I saw the presentation for a moment.
What's Lolly say there, Chaslin?
Yeah, I saw the presentation now.
Okay, so Lolly says she sees the presentation. I don't.
No.
Okay, we're
Oh,
gonna,
she's lost it again. Okay.
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna close the presentation for a minute and open it again. Share screen. This is what our world is now. Everybody can kind of talk amongst themselves. Have a little private thought. That's not doing it, is it? Okay, we're gonna go.
Now.
Okay, I see it again.
Yeah, but you're seeing the notes.
No.
Oh, we're grooving. Okay. All
Is
right,
everyone
everybody.
else doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay, looks like everyone's seeing it, so we
Are
can
they happy people now?
resume.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Miss Christine.
That's okay. No problem. We're right here. So you did you get the part about Buddy in the mailbox?
Let's start that part over. I think that would be a good way to resume.
Okay. Well, all I did was when I went on Twitter and just typed in hashtag mailbox, I came up with this quotation that I superimposed with a picture of a mailbox. And it's from John Updike. And of course, he's dead now, but this is a quotation that somebody tweeted on this sort of churning time of mailing ballots. And so this is Updike, of course, long before COVID. I never see a blue mailbox without a spark of warmth and wonder and gratitude that this intricate and extensive service is maintained for my benefit. So let's press on from that. And we've discovered in Lost Words that language changes how we see the world metaphorically. But did you know that the words we speak can literally change how we see? Colors, for instance. Until 200 years ago, by the way, there was no word for the word orange in English. Before then, the color was called by the two words that mixed to make it. Another Hron-Rad, yellow-red. And we've now discovered that ancient languages, including Greek, Chinese, Hebrew, and Japanese, didn't have a word for blue. In the Odyssey, Homer repeats at least a dozen times the wine dark sea. And for years, people wondered where that phrase came from, but no one has ever been able to know where the wine dark sea came from. In fact, the first society to actually have an actual color for blue was our friend Egyptians, who introduced the first recorded blue dyes for fabric. And now blue seems to have entered our human lexicon. It's a lovely sculpture by ceramic artist Anne Hirondell. And then, of course, our uniquely American music, jazz. Blues is an offshoot of jazz. And I'm going to end here with one more thing about metaphor. And it seems like the more we notice the more we're engaged in the world, and the more we translate that noticing into language, written, spoken, sung, danced with our partner, our friends, the woman at the checkout counter, the homeless guy with the black lab. And the more interested we are, I think, in those details, the more invested we get in who we are and who we're with and where we are. It's this particularity, I think, that makes language sing. So I know we've had enough about Homer, but he's in the title, so I have to pay his rent. So this is kind of interesting, that this particularity came to light when Tony Hoagland wrote about Homer's metaphors. They're so distinct that they're even called Homeric metaphors, cinematic for the way they fabricate narrative scenes inside a much larger story. For example, when Odysseus is in war and also he has bored the eye out of Cyclops, he actually calls that oh no, actually it isn't the Cyclops. That's for the Cyclops right there, where he bored the eye out of the Cyclops. He refers to that specific screw that boat builders used in Greece to build boats. He uses very common metaphors, like the metaphors of fish drawn up to the sea. When he gets home, he talks about all of the suitors that Penelope has had to keep away, all of these men wanting to marry her and have her riches that Odysseus left with her. He beat them down and dragged them up from the sea like fish in their nets. And it's really, really interesting how those metaphors tie what he called them, the poet Hoagland calls them culture binding metaphors. He says that when even describing scenes of violence and destruction and war, he affirms the ultimate unity of Greek culture. I guess in other words, while the stories may depict a moment of extreme uncertainty and stress and apparent chaos, the simple images of daily life, fish hauled up from the sea, the tools that boatmen use, they keep that chaotic world knitted together. And it makes me wonder about our language. What binds us? Hashtags, are they only shorthand for political allegiance? Or are they a new way to unify and bind us through strength and solidarity? And just when we think the hashtag is new, a new invention, we find out that there was a big stone in South Africa, 70 to 100,000 years old, drawing of a hashtag. And we can ask ourselves, are emojis making us lazy, weakening our facility with language? Or are they another kind of ancient pictograph to show how we feel? Just like this rock down right from where I live in the Suquamish at Agate Passage. That's 1,000 years BC, and it's still there. So now we've come circle back to Homer, and it seems that the words that last are not the abstract rages of despots, but language that is grounded in metaphor and daily life. And sometimes language speaks to us only in silence. If you are on overwhelm at the moment with too much language, perhaps this poem by Brian Doyle might change how you think. It did for me. I'll read it aloud and you can too. If you all unmute, Chaslin, could you unmute everybody? Doesn't matter if we're all jangly and at different places, but I'll read the title and then we'll start together. And and then we'll end with a little bit of silence and then questions. But let's read this all together, shall we? The Best Poem Ever by Brian Doyle. Ready? What if, says this, I want to hear you guys, unmute thyselves. What if, says a small child to me this afternoon. Is everybody unmuted? I can't hear everybody.
Not quite yet. I'm just trying to see if I can. Unmute everybody. Okay, I think we can try it now.
Yay! Okay, start at the beginning of the poem, all of us. What if, says a small child to me this afternoon, we made a poem without using any words at all. Wouldn't that be cool? You could use long twigs and feathers or spider strands and arrange them so that people imagine that words could be there. Wouldn't that be cool? So cool.
There's a different poem for each reader.
Yes.
That would be the best poem ever.
The poem would be on the page, right? It would be in the air, sort of. It would be between those twigs and the person's eyes, or behind the person's eyes. After the person saw whatever poem he or she saw, maybe there are a lot
that you can write down.
Could that be? But they're still there, even if no one can write them down, right? Poems in books are only a little bit of all the poems there are. Those are only poems someone found words for. Nice.
Thank you.
I like it. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Christine.
It's so fun to see you guys.
That's great. I'm going to turn myself along here. Here. Maybe.
So are there questions on chat or any questions that, or comments that you guys are prompted to say? There's no good or bad or ugly or weird. Yeah, Annie.
Oh, something that just came up to me is how with the political thing, Senator Harris is always called by Kamala, and all the men are called by their last name.
Yeah, that's interesting too, isn't it? Yeah.
Other
thoughts?
I was just talking with my daughter about the book 1984 and how we're now being led through this. This is not what we said, or this is not what it adds up to. 2 and 2 is no longer 4, it's 3. And that there's a lot of word power in what I don't know what the right word is. The people who are using the words are putting onto the spin that they're putting onto those words. And that's almost as powerful as the words themselves. The spin.
Yes, I agree. That's really interesting. Anything that made you uncomfortable that you want to explore more about? Yeah, Betsy.
Thanks. You know, you were talking about the more specific we get, the more universal we are. And in our current societal and political dialogue, it seems sometimes that we're so tribal and individual, and that the more specific we get, the more divided we get. And
that's interesting.
How do we switch that? You know, because I think you're right. In art, the more true you are to yourself, the more universal it is to everybody's experience.
What a great comment. Anybody want to comment on that? Yeah, Mary.
I feel like it's almost curiosity versus fear. in all the historical details you were giving us, people who looked beyond, they didn't have the prejudice
Yeah.
that was being fed. And it was just, we have so much fear now. And if we can just get back to being curious about other people, other cultures, and the world, that it might be a way back in.
Yeah, Betsy, also that might be the specificity of others, like noticing others rather than putting them in an idea of that person. They're wearing blue sneakers, or you notice that instead of taking I'm making this up, but instead of taking the pavement back down to the park, that person took the trail, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Noticing that specificity of others. And I think that is really interesting, because we think we're so individual, but we can't be fully blown, grow as individuals unless we're connected.
Yeah.
Well, that's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's so interesting because, there have been articles in the Times about, if you wear another culture's clothing, is that cultural approbation? I mean, do you have a right? If you ask someone, where are you from? It's not a question of curiosity, but you're not from here. So we're in this struggle, with how we can connect.
Yeah.
Appropriately.
And I think coming back to words, maybe rephrasing that sentence, admiring her skirt, rather than are you from here, or where does that come from, or admiring in that specificity that drew you to her, rather than using a prepackaged phrase.
Yeah.
And that's where the question of hashtags comes in, right? Are they now just prepackaged phrases, or are they actually uniting, or are they dividing? I'm not answering that. I'm saying that's what you brought up.
I have to say that the whole thing about hashtags, it strips all the nuance out of things. And you could be ironic because, we also have body language, and we have lots of ways expressing things. From hashtags have grown emojis. So you can put a hashtag, I love Kamala, and then put a smiley face after that, or something, to put a little spin on that as a way of putting body language into what you just said. Maybe you were being ironic. Maybe you were being comedic. You don't get that just from the words and the hashtag.
Well, it's going to force us into different new language to get that. It's going to stretch us. Stretch us.
So I have a book recommendation for you, David. I just read a book by a linguist named Gretchen McCulloch, and it's called Because Internet. And she took like 2 or 3 chapters to talk about what you've just addressed, where how do you address sarcasm in written language? How do you deal with the lack of body language and nonverbal communication? And I was going to bring up the emojis because Christine, you brought that up as well. And we sort of thought initially that the emojis were a way to kind of combat our inability to see each other through text. And, it was, somebody's, if they're angry looking or they've crossed their arms. But it ends up being that there's a new school of thought that emojis are less individualistic and more about gesture representation. Absolutely fascinating train of thought. So I definitely recommend if you're interested in how emojis have changed in our perception as we've been using them differently. Because Internet is a really interesting book about that.
I'm so glad you suggested that, Chaslin.
Yeah. I went through that book so quickly. It was fascinating. And also with hashtags, because they originated in the technology world in the early days of the internet as a way to organize things, and how they're not really used as much in organizing, but they're used as phrases now. The changes are really fascinating.
Annie.
Well, I know Christina knows this, but most of you others don't know this. I'm a sign language interpreter. So when I write to deaf people, you would put those things in, like smile or wink, or, you know, so you're kind of used to adding the physical gestures that someone would see when you're communicating with them.
Well, there you are, back to the body again. And there, you know, that is fascinating, isn't it? And how that is just a whole different dimension of communicating. Yeah. Thanks, Annie. I just wrote that down because I think I'd like to add it to this talk, you know, on that level. Because language means so many things, doesn't it? It's not just words. I mean, many of you know I have this little Arabian horse that I have, you know, learned so much about the body from him and his communication. It's not about voice aids. It's about the body totally. And that is so interesting too. And right now in this COVID, as we're, you know, also careful, our bodies are like this, both, you know, this safety area and also potential danger area. We're changing our way of moving in the world. Have you noticed how like veer, the word veer or list seems to have a lot of meaning.
So thinking about the future of language and the continued evolution, Christine, where do you see it going, and how do you suppose that the pandemic is going to change language for the long term? I mean, because we were seeing that written communication was trying to make up for visuals, but now if we're going to rely less on text by itself and more text in combination with Zoom videos or things like that, where do you see language going?
Oh, it's always growing. I'm not afraid. I mean, I really do. That's not even believe. I mean, it's just look at history. We have chaos and destruction, and from it comes a whole. Look at the Renaissance, came out of the medieval wars, hideous, you know, peasants under suppression, and then all of a sudden this new world of art and learning, and everything happened, and language changed drastically. I think we're completely. And it may be not in our lifetime, which is a little hard to think about. On the other hand, there's always so much changing. I mean, and at the beginning, like the internet is still fairly new for us, and all the emojis and the hashtags, and we're like, oh, but some of us are still writing sentences, you know, a lot of us are still writing sentences. A lot of us are still communicating with language that means something inside us, not just packaged words. And we need it more. And when we suffer, as the world is suffering now, I just think new language comes out of that. I really do. I have no idea what's, you know, going to happen in terms of the technology and all that. But look at what we're able to do in the middle of this pandemic, to have a discussion like this with people from all over. It's extraordinary, and it's intimate in a weird way. I don't think we'd be talking like this in an auditorium in the same way. We're all coming together in our little intimate way here, and I'm delighted. And it's now 4 minutes after 5, and I'm a person who doesn't like to keep people past the time. I'm very strict about that with myself. But unless there's anything pressing, like you found the cure for COVID, I'm listening. And please write me. If you're not somebody I do know, just go to ChristineHemp.com and offer your opinion there and find my email. It's right there, just in the contact. I'd love a further conversation with any of you, friends or colleagues or people I don't know, because this is really fun, and I'm so glad you came on this, what is it, Wednesday afternoon? I can't remember.
Tuesday, yeah. How do we cue? We all applaud here.
Oh, I love that. I'll applaud you too.
Great program. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys. This is great. And thank you for recording, Chaslin, so you could tell your friends about it. And
Yeah.
okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to post the link or the video on YouTube. And if you guys want to share that to your friends so they can, you know, see the pearls of wisdom, that would be amazing.
How do they get that? How do they get that?
So you can go to our website, upperskagitlibrary.org, and there's going to be a link to our YouTube page. Or if you go straight to YouTube, you can just search Upper Skagit Library and it'll be in there. For patrons of our library, we're also going to be getting Christine's latest book. We're going to be getting that, I think, at the beginning of September. So patrons will be able to check that out and read that, which is really exciting. And we are going to do, since you registered with your emails, we're going to be sending you a survey. And it would be very helpful to the library and to Christine if you guys would fill out the survey just to let us know how we're doing and if you have any thoughts on how all the presentation went. So it should be super quick and super easy, but it helps us make programs like this possible. So we would really appreciate it if when we send that out, we could get some responses for that. And then just, you know, share the link for the video with your friends so that, you know, we can spread the joy of language.
Thank you, Chaslin.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christine.
Bye.
Thank you guys for
Thank you.
joining. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.